The royal lineage of Europe's most powerful dynasty was a tapestry woven with threads of glory, conquest, and breathtaking wealth. The Habsburgs, rulers of vast empires that spanned continents, held sway for centuries. Their power seemed limitless, their heritage unshakable. Yet beneath the glittering crowns and within the opulent palaces, a different, darker story unfolded. It was a tale of minds fracturing, spirits besieged, and the chilling grip of madness that stalked their bloodline. For 6 Habsburg rulers, the burden of the crown was tragically compounded by an invisible enemy, an internal torment that reshaped their lives and at times altered the course of history. Their struggles were real, their suffering profound, leaving behind a haunting legacy of mental illness in the halls of power. Number 50. A princess bound for greatness. The year was 1479, and in the bustling Castilian city of Toledo, a new life entered the world. She was Joanna, 3rd child of the formidable Isabella, the first of Castile, and Ferdinand II of Aragon, the Catholic monarchs who would soon unite Spain and usher in a golden age. From her earliest days, Joanna was a princess of immense promise. She was known for her sharp intellect, a keen mind that devoured books and grasped complex subjects with ease. Tutors marveled at her grasp of Latin, her understanding of law, and her passion for music. She was also described as deeply religious, a characteristic often nurtured in the children of such devout parents. Her upbringing was strict, as was common for royal children. Isabella, her mother, was a no-nonsense queen. A warrior and a shrewd politician, she instilled in her daughters a sense of duty and piety. Joanna, however, possessed a sensitive and passionate nature that sometimes clashed with the rigid expectations of court life. There were whispers of intense emotions, of a fierce temperament simmering beneath a quiet exterior. These were dismissed as youthful exuberance, perhaps, or simply the strong will of a royal princess. No one could have predicted the storms that lay ahead, the profound shifts in her mind that would cast a long shadow over her destiny. The stage was set for a life that would defy all royal expectations, a life destined to be remembered not for power, but for profound sorrow. Number 49. A fiery love and a dangerous obsession. Joanna's fate, like many royal daughters, was sealed by strategic marriage. In 1496, she journeyed to Flanders, a part of the vast Habsburg dominions, to marry Philip the Handsome, Archduke of Austria. Philip was a man of striking beauty and charm, a dashing figure who captivated Joanna from their first meeting. For a princess raised in the austere Spanish court, Philip's more free-spirited nature and magnetic presence were intoxicating. Their initial connection was immediate and intense, a whirlwind of passionate love that startled their respective courts. They were deeply, almost obsessively attracted to each other. However, beneath the surface of this fiery romance lay the seeds of turmoil. Joanna's love for Philip was all-consuming, bordering on possessiveness. She longed for his constant presence, becoming intensely jealous when he was absent or when his attention strayed. Philip, for his part, was a philanderer. He enjoyed the company of other women, and his infidelities became a source of unbearable pain for Joanna. Her jealousy was not merely a fleeting emotion. It was a profound anguish that would send her into fits of despair and rage. She would weep uncontrollably, sometimes refusing to eat or sleep. Her intense devotion to Philip, initially seen as a virtue, began to manifest as an unhealthy fixation, a pattern of behavior that raised eyebrows even among those accustomed to royal eccentricities. The very depth of her affection was becoming a dangerous vulnerability. Number 48. The Crown, the Curse, and the Coffin. A series of unexpected deaths thrust Joanna onto the center stage of European politics. Her elder sister Isabella and Isabella's infant son died, followed by her elder brother John and his unborn child. Suddenly, Joanna, once a minor player, became the direct heir to the crowns of Castile and Aragon. This was a monumental shift, transforming her from a minor archduchess into the future Queen of Spain. She and Philip were now King and Queen of Castile, a powerful new role that brought immense pressure. Her husband, Philip, continued his womanizing ways, driving Joanna into deeper fits of melancholia and despair. She would lash out, tearing at her own hair, refusing to speak or eat. Her behavior grew increasingly erratic, fueling rumors across the courts of Europe. Then, in 1506, tragedy struck again. Philip the Handsome died suddenly, likely of typhoid fever, at the young age of 28. For Joanna, who had loved him with an all-consuming passion, his death was utterly devastating. It shattered her world, pushing her already fragile mind past its breaking point. She refused to let his body be buried. She insisted on keeping his coffin with her, embarking on a bizarre, mournful journey across Castile. This grim procession, traveling by night, became a chilling spectacle, a public display of her profound grief and unraveling sanity. Number 47. The Royal Road, Trip of Grief. The death of Philip sent Joanna into a profound, prolonged state of mourning that defied all conventional understanding. She could not, would not part with her beloved husband's body. She insisted that Philip, despite being dead, was merely sleeping, or perhaps that he would be resurrected. This belief, born of intense grief and a deeply disturbed mind, led to one of the most bizarre episodes in royal history. Joanna embarked on a macabre journey across Castile, traveling with Philip's embalmed corpse. The coffin, often carried on her shoulders or placed on a cart, became her constant companion. This was no short journey. For 3 years, from 1506 to 1509, the Queen of Castile wandered the dusty roads of her kingdom. She commanded the procession to stop only in monasteries, never in convents, fearing that nuns would try to steal her husband's body or try to bewitch him. The sight of the Queen, a dark figure often veiled, accompanying a coffin everywhere she went, was both terrifying and pitiful. She would periodically open the coffin to gaze at her husband's remains, sometimes even trying to kiss him. Chroniclers of the time described her as wild-eyed, disheveled, and utterly consumed by her grief. This relentless, mournful pilgrimage confirmed in the minds of many that Joanna, despite being the rightful queen, was indeed Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. Her personal tragedy was now a very public spectacle, a source of both pity and political maneuvering. Number 46. The Confined Queen. Joanna's father, Ferdinand II, watched his daughter's increasingly erratic behavior with a mixture of concern and political calculation. With Philip dead and Joanna exhibiting clear signs of mental instability, Ferdinand seized the opportunity to reassume control of Castile. In 1509, he finally confined Joanna to the royal palace in Tordesillas, a fortress-like residence in Valladolid. This was not a kindly retirement. It was an imprisonment. She was held there effectively, a prisoner for the rest of her life, a period spanning 46 years. Her confinement was rigorous. She was often neglected, left in squalid conditions and deprived of proper care. Her son Charles V, who inherited the vast Habsburg Empire, visited her rarely. He maintained her confinement partly out of genuine concern for her mental state, but also to prevent any political factions from using her as a figurehead against his rule. Joanna's isolation deepened her despair. She spent her days in a state of melancholia, often refusing to eat, bathe, or change her clothes. She would speak only rarely, sometimes to complain about her captivity, sometimes to utter nonsensical phrases. The once vibrant, intelligent princess was reduced to a shadow of her former self, a queen locked away from the world, her mind lost in the labyrinth of her own sorrow and delusion. Her existence became a stark reminder of the fragile line between power and profound personal suffering. Number 45. A Life Behind Walls. The nearly half-century Joanna spent confined within the walls of Tordesillas was a grim and solitary existence. Her confinement was overseen by a series of guardians appointed by her father and then her son. These guardians often treated her more as a nuisance than a sovereign. Records from the time, though scarce and often biased, paint a picture of a woman neglected, often in poor health and deeply distressed. She would suffer periods of catatonia, staring blankly for hours. interspersed with episodes of agitation and paranoia. She believed she was being persecuted, that her food was poisoned, or that those around her were plotting against her. She communicated little, often only in whispers or sudden outbursts. Attempts to reason with her or to provide comfort often failed as she recoiled from contact. Her days were a monotonous cycle of isolation, punctuated by the occasional visit from her daughter Catherine, who lived with her for a time. Even Catherine's presence could not lift the oppressive weight of Joanna's despair. Her mental state fluctuated, but the dominant condition was one of profound depression and delusion. She died in 1555, at the age of 75, still confined, still known as Juana the Loca. Her life serves as a haunting prologue to the story of other Habsburg rulers, who would also grapple with the insidious effects of mental illness. Her suffering was real, a tragic consequence of both her personal disposition and the political machinations that ensured her silence. Number 44. The Emperor of Solitude. Centuries after Joanna's tragic confinement, another Habsburg ruler found himself increasingly isolated, though by choice, from the clamor of his empire. Rudolf II, born in 1552, became Holy Roman Emperor in 1576. He was raised in the strict, devout, and politically charged court of his uncle, Philip II of Spain, a childhood that may have instilled in him a deeply reserved and melancholic temperament. Unlike many Habsburgs, who were known for their military prowess or political acumen, Rudolf was a man of contemplation, drawn to the esoteric and the artistic. His reign began with promise. He moved the imperial capital to Prague, transforming it into a vibrant center of art, science, and a haven for thinkers of all stripes. He was a prodigious patron of the arts, assembling one of the finest collections of paintings, sculptures, and rare objects in Europe. He also had a passionate interest in alchemy, astrology, and the occult sciences, often spending hours locked away in his laboratories with alchemists and mystics. However, as his reign progressed, this intellectual curiosity gradually morphed into an obsessive reclusiveness. Rudolf began to withdraw from public life, avoiding his ministers, neglecting affairs of state, and rarely appearing in public. The once vibrant court became a den of whispered rumors and unfulfilled duties. His mind, once so keen, began to show the strains of deep melancholy and paranoia. Number 43. The Shadows of Prague Castle. Rudolf II's retreat into himself became a defining characteristic of his rule. Prague Castle, his magnificent residence, became less a seat of power and more a fortress of solitude. He would spend his days in his famed Kunstkammer, his cabinet of curiosities, surrounded by his vast collections of art, scientific instruments, and strange artifacts. While this might seem like the harmless hobby of an intellectual monarch, Rudolf's obsession with these objects bordered on the pathological. He sought to unlock the secrets of the universe, to find the philosopher's stone, to understand the mysteries of the cosmos through a blend of science and magic. His reclusiveness grew so profound that he often refused to meet with his own ministers or ambassadors. Important documents went unsigned. Critical decisions were postponed indefinitely, and the affairs of the Holy Roman Empire drifted rudderless. His court, filled with astrologers, alchemists, and charlatans, fed his growing paranoia and distrust. He suspected plots everywhere, fearing assassination attempts and betrayals. These fears, coupled with profound bouts of depression, left him unable to govern effectively. Chroniclers noted his deep silences, his sudden rages, and his profound disinterest in the day-to-day realities of his vast dominion. The shadows within Prague Castle grew longer, mirroring the deepening shadows within the emperor's mind. His empire suffered as its ruler became increasingly lost in his own internal world. Number 42. The Emperor's Internal Battle. The internal struggles of Rudolf II manifested in clear and debilitating ways. He suffered from severe bouts of depression, periods where he was overcome by a profound sadness and lethargy. During these times, he would refuse to leave his rooms, neglect his appearance, and avoid all human contact. These depressive episodes were often interspersed with periods of intense paranoia. He believed his family, particularly his younger brother, Matthias, was plotting against him. He suspected his courtiers of treachery, and his advisors found it increasingly difficult to gain his trust or even his audience. His paranoia was not entirely unfounded, as his family was indeed concerned about his inability to rule and was actively trying to wrest power from him. However, Rudolf's fear reached irrational levels, preventing him from addressing the very real political threats to his reign. His decision-making became erratic and unpredictable. He would make impulsive choices, then immediately regret them. Withdrawing further into his shell, he also developed a strong aversion to public appearances, believing that he was being watched and judged. This combination of deep melancholy reclusive tendencies and intense paranoia rendered him increasingly unfit to govern. Weakening the Habsburg grip on the Holy Roman Empire at a critical time in European history. The empire needed a strong hand, but its emperor was engaged in a constant losing battle within his own mind. Number 41. The brothers' quarrel and a throne undone. Rudolf II's profound mental health issues had direct and devastating consequences for the stability of the Holy Roman Empire. As the empire faced increasing religious strife and external threats, particularly from the Ottoman Turks, Rudolf's inability to govern became a critical liability. His brother Matthias, a more pragmatic and ambitious figure, began to openly challenge Rudolf's authority. This initiated what became known as the brothers' quarrel, a bitter power struggle within the Habsburg family. Matthias capitalized on Rudolf's erratic behavior and reclusiveness, gradually gaining support from the various estates and princes of the empire. He effectively stripped Rudolf of his authority over Hungary, Moravia, and Austria. Rudolf was forced to sign away these territories to Matthias in 1608. Even with this humiliation, Rudolf clung stubbornly to the title of Holy Roman Emperor and his Bohemian lands. But his grip was slipping. The constant pressure, the political maneuvering, and his deepening paranoia pushed him to the brink. His last years were marked by increasing isolation, bouts of intense rage, and a profound sense of abandonment. He died in 1612, a monarch dethroned by his own family, his mind consumed by the shadows that had haunted him for decades. His tragic reign serves as a stark example of how a ruler's mental state can directly impact the fate of nations. Number 40. The Melancholy Monarch. 2 centuries. After Rudolf II, another prominent Habsburg, Philip IV of Spain, ascended the throne in 1621. He inherited a vast, sprawling empire that encompassed Spain, its American colonies, parts of Italy, and the Netherlands. Philip was a man of refined tastes, a passionate patron of the arts, and a keen collector, much like Rudolf II. He famously championed artists like Diego Velázquez, whose somber portraits capture the king's quiet dignity and underlying melancholy. From his youth, Philip was described as reserved, prone to introspection, and deeply sensitive. He took his royal duties seriously, understanding the immense responsibility that rested on his shoulders. However, he often found the weight of governance overwhelming. He lacked the decisive and forceful personality of his predecessors. Throughout his long reign, Philip was plagued by recurring bouts of deep sadness and withdrawal, a profound melancholia that frequently left him feeling overwhelmed and dispirited. This was not merely a fleeting mood. It was a persistent characteristic that colored his rule. Historians often refer to his sadness or melancholy as a defining trait, one that impacted his capacity to lead during a challenging period for the Spanish Empire. His quiet suffering became a constant companion, a private burden carried by a king expected to project strength. Number 39. The burden of empire and loss. Philip IV's reign was a period of immense challenge for Spain. The empire was engaged in numerous costly wars, including the devastating 30 Years' War, which drained its resources and manpower. Naval defeats, the loss of Portugal, and internal rebellions piled pressure upon the already struggling monarchy. Philip, a king who deeply felt the burdens of his office, internalized these failures. He saw them as a reflection of his own inadequacies, leading to deeper introspection and self-reproach. Beyond the political and military woes, Philip also endured immense personal tragedy. He outlived several of his children, including his beloved first son, Balthasar Charles, who died young. His first wife, Elizabeth of France, also passed away prematurely. These successive losses weighed heavily on the king, exacerbating his predisposition to melancholy. He became increasingly withdrawn, spending long hours in prayer and contemplation, often neglecting the daily affairs of state. His personal sorrow mingled with the decline of his empire, creating a pervasive atmosphere of gloom around the court. The king's private grief became intertwined with the public struggles of his nation. A heavy cloak of sadness draped over the once dominant power. His burden was not just the crown, but the crushing weight of personal and imperial decline. Number 38. The king and his confidant. Recognizing his own limitations and his growing tendency towards withdrawal, Philip IV largely delegated the day-to-day governance of Spain to his favorite Gaspar de Guzman, the Count Duke of Olivares. Olivares was a brilliant, ambitious, and tireless statesman who sought to revitalize Spain and restore its imperial glory. For years, Philip relied almost entirely on Olivares, trusting him with the immense responsibilities of the empire. This reliance, while initially practical, also stemmed from Philip's own internal struggles. Philip often lacked the energy and decisiveness required to lead effectively. He found the constant demands of kingship exhausting and preferred to immerse himself in his artistic pursuits or religious devotion. Olivares became his shield, handling the difficult decisions and the unpleasant realities of politics. However, even this arrangement had its limits. As Spain's fortunes continued to decline, public resentment grew, and Olivares became a scapegoat. The king, though deeply attached to his minister, eventually succumbed to pressure and dismissed Olivares in 1643. This decision, though politically necessary, plunged Philip into deeper despair. He felt betrayed, isolated, and more keenly aware of his own inadequacies. The loss of his most trusted confidant left him feeling even more alone and overwhelmed, further fueling his already melancholic disposition. The weight of his responsibilities seemed to intensify without Olivares to bear some of the load. Number 37. A life of penance and piety. As his reign drew to a close and Spain continued its decline, Philip IV retreated further into a life of intense piety and penance. The series of military defeats, the loss of territories, and the personal tragedies he endured led him to believe that God was punishing him and his kingdom for his sins. He saw himself as a flawed vessel unworthy of the crown, and sought spiritual redemption with an almost desperate fervor. Philip spent countless hours in prayer, fasted regularly, and engaged in self-mortification, often wearing rough hair shirts under his royal garments. He became deeply introspective, constantly examining his conscience and seeking spiritual guidance from his confessors. His private quarters in the Palacio del Buen Retiro became a sanctuary of contemplation, far removed from the political intrigues and demands of the court. Velázquez's later portraits of Philip capture a man worn down by suffering, his face etched with a profound sense of weariness and quiet resignation. He died in 1665, a king who had reigned for over 40 years, but who had been plagued throughout by a deep, pervasive melancholia that reflected the twilight years of the Spanish Habsburgs. His personal sadness mirrored the fading glory of his empire, a poignant end to a challenging reign. Number 36. The end of a line. The saddest and most dramatic example of the Habsburgs' struggles with mental illness, often intertwined with profound physical ailments, appeared in the very last Spanish Habsburg ruler, Charles II. Born in 1661, Charles was the product of centuries of relentless inbreeding. Within the Habsburg family, a practice designed to consolidate power and keep wealth within the bloodline. His parents, Philip IV and Mariana of Austria, were uncle and niece. This close genetic relationship, repeated over generations, had devastating consequences for Charles. From the moment of his birth, it was clear Charles was profoundly unwell. He was a sickly infant with a very large head, a severely prognathous jaw. The infamous Habsburg jaw was extreme in his case, making it difficult to chew or speak, and an undersized, fragile body. He was late to develop, not walking until he was 4 and not speaking until he was 8. Even then, his speech was often unintelligible. His physical deformities were so pronounced that he was barely recognizable as a human being in some accounts. His intellect was severely impaired, leaving him intellectually disabled. He was fragile, weak, and constantly ill, suffering from a litany of ailments, including fevers, digestive problems, and epileptic seizures. His very existence was a stark, living testament to the dangers of generations of incestuous marriage, a tragic culmination of dynastic ambition. Number 35. A childhood of frailty and superstition. Charles II's childhood was a grim reflection of his physical and mental state. He was a solitary, sickly child, constantly attended by doctors and nurses, but receiving little in the way of intellectual stimulation or emotional warmth. His mother, Queen Mariana, was fiercely protective but also deeply superstitious. The court, surrounded by a dying king and a sickly heir, became a hotbed of intrigue and fear. The general belief was that Charles's afflictions were not natural, but the result of witchcraft or demonic possession. This belief was fueled by his strange appearance, his convulsions, and his erratic behavior. Exorcisms were performed regularly, elaborate rituals designed to cast out the evil spirits believed to torment the young king. He was subjected to various bizarre cures and superstitious practices, none of which had any positive effect on his underlying conditions. Charles was largely unable to participate in the traditional education of a royal prince. He barely learned to read or write, and his grasp of complex matters remained minimal throughout his life. He was a king in name only, a puppet in the hands of the competing factions that surrounded him. His childhood was not one of play or learning, but of constant illness, fear, and the dark shadow of superstition, further isolating an already profoundly vulnerable mind. Number 34. The Bewitched King. As Charles II grew into adulthood, his physical and mental state only worsened. He remained frail, often bedridden, and barely able to perform even the simplest of tasks. His intellectual disabilities prevented him from truly understanding the immense responsibilities of his crown. He struggled with basic comprehension and decision-making, making him a pawn in the intricate political games of the Spanish court. His extreme physical deformities and his profound mental slowness led to his famous nickname, El Hequidai, the Bewitched. The belief that he was under a spell or possessed by demons was widespread, not just among the common people, but within the highest echelons of the court. His mother and other powerful figures genuinely believed that his condition could only be explained by supernatural means. This led to a continuous cycle of exorcisms, prayers, and even public rituals to rid him of the perceived evil. Physicians, unable to find a medical explanation or a cure, were baffled and often resorted to crude remedies or simply blamed the devil. Charles himself, perhaps influenced by those around him, also believed he was bewitched. His reign was less about governing and more about surviving, a perpetual struggle against an internal enemy and the external machinations of a court desperate for a healthy heir. His life was a stark public tragedy unfolding on the grand stage of European power. Number 33. A kingdom in turmoil. Charles II's profound incapacities meant that Spain was effectively ruled by a series of regents, powerful ministers, and competing factions within the court. His mother, Mariana of Austria, often held the reins of power, followed by various favorites and ambitious noblemen. The king himself was a figurehead, wheeled out for public appearances, but utterly incapable of making meaningful decisions or exerting true authority. This power vacuum led to constant instability. infighting among the nobility, and a further decline of Spain's global standing. The state of the Spanish Empire mirrored the state of its king, weak, ailing, and struggling to maintain its former glory. International rivals, particularly France, watched with keen interest, eager to exploit Spain's internal disarray. Charles's mental and physical fragility meant that critical decisions were either delayed, poorly made, or simply not made at all. The very functioning of the government was hampered by the king's condition. His reign was a period of stagnation and decline, a somber era defined by the tragic figure on the throne who was too ill to lead. The future of Spain, and indeed the balance of power in Europe, hung precariously on the life of this frail and tormented monarch. Number 32. The Succession Crisis and the End. The most critical issue of Charles II's reign was the question of succession. Despite 2 marriages, Charles was unable to produce an heir. This was not surprising, given his physical ailments, which likely included infertility. The lack of a direct successor meant that the vast Spanish Empire, with its rich colonies, was up for grabs among the other European powers. The major contenders were the French Bourbon and the Austrian Habsburgs, both related to Charles and eager to claim the inheritance. As Charles's health deteriorated further in his final years, his physical and mental decline became even more pronounced. He was tormented by delusions and seizures, his body wasting away. He was a gaunt skeletal figure, often unable to move or speak. His court became a macabre spectacle, with various factions vying for his favor, trying to influence his will regarding the succession. The dying king, unable to think clearly, was pressured from all sides. He eventually named Philip, Duke of Anjou, a grandson of King Louis XIV of France, as his successor, likely under immense duress. Charles II died in 1700, aged 38, bringing an end to the Spanish Habsburg dynasty, and immediately triggering the War of the Spanish Succession. His life was a profound tragedy, a chilling warning of the consequences of unchecked dynastic intermarriage, and a testament to the suffering of a king born into a role he was physically and mentally incapable of fulfilling. Number 31. The Unlikely Emperor. More than a century after Charles II's death, another Habsburg emperor, Ferdinand I of Austria, became a poignant example of a ruler plagued by inherent mental and physical disabilities. Born in 1793, Ferdinand was the eldest son of Emperor Francis I of Austria. From his birth, it was clear he was not like other children. He suffered from hydrocephalus, a condition that caused fluid buildup in his brain, resulting in a large head and significant intellectual impairment. He was also prone to epileptic seizures, which sometimes left him unconscious or disoriented. His father, Francis I, was a pragmatic and stern ruler who understood his son's limitations. Ferdinand struggled with basic motor skills and cognitive functions. He learned to walk and speak much later than other children, and even then his speech was often indistinct and his understanding limited. He was kind-hearted and gentle, but completely unsuited for the immense responsibilities of governing one of Europe's most powerful empires. Despite his clear disabilities, primogeniture dictated that he was the rightful heir. Francis I, upholding the principle of dynastic succession, insisted that Ferdinand would ascend to the throne. This decision set the stage for an unprecedented and challenging reign, placing a severely impaired monarch at the head of a vast and complex state. Number 30. A figurehead on the throne. When Emperor Francis I died in 1835, Ferdinand, against all practical advice, became Emperor of Austria and King of Hungary and Bohemia. His father had made provisions for this, establishing a regency council to effectively govern in Ferdinand's name. This council, known as the Secret State Conference, was dominated by the powerful Chancellor Metternich, along with Ferdinand's uncle, Archduke Ludwig, and his brother Archduke Franz Karl. They were the true rulers, while Ferdinand served as a mere figurehead. Ferdinand's intellectual capacity was limited to understanding simple instructions and performing rote tasks. He could sign his name, though often with difficulty, and he could preside over formal ceremonies, albeit with minimal participation. He was tutored to memorize the necessary phrases and gestures for public appearances. His reign became a delicate balance, maintaining the illusion of an active monarch while the real power lay elsewhere. Ferdinand himself seemed largely content with this arrangement. He enjoyed simple pleasures, gardening, playing cards, and traveling on the newly emerging railways. He was known for his kindness and his simple, innocent nature. However, his profound limitations meant that Austria, during a period of burgeoning nationalism and social unrest, was effectively without a truly engaged leader, relying instead on the collective wisdom of a council that often had its own internal disagreements. Number 29. The Emperor's Daily Struggles. Ferdinand I's daily life as emperor was a carefully managed routine designed to mask his profound intellectual and physical disabilities. He awoke early, was dressed and assisted by his valets, and then proceeded with a series of prearranged activities. He would spend time in his garden, which he genuinely loved. Tending to plants, he enjoyed the mechanical marvels of the age, particularly trains, and would often take rides on the Imperial Railway. He had a fondness for pastries, famously remarking, "I am the emperor, and I want dumplings." When a certain fruit was out of season, formal duties were reduced to a minimum. He would be presented with documents to sign, often simply copying a pre-written signature. Audiences were brief and highly choreographed, with Ferdinand speaking only a few pre-rehearsed lines. His frequent epileptic seizures were a constant concern. During or after these episodes, he would be disoriented, confused, or unresponsive. The court developed elaborate protocols to quickly remove him from public view. When a seizure was imminent, his private life was similarly simple. He was married to Maria Anna of Savoy, who treated him with great kindness and managed his household, often acting as his de facto guardian and caelor. Despite being an emperor, Ferdinand's existence was largely defined by his dependence on others and his limited capacity to engage with the world beyond his immediate sheltered environment. Number 28. The Revolutions and the Reluctant Abdication. The year 1848 swept across Europe like a wildfire, igniting revolutions and social unrest. The Austrian Empire, with its diverse ethnic groups and simmering nationalist sentiments, was not immune. Vienna erupted in rebellion, challenging the very foundations of the Habsburg monarchy. For Ferdinand I, these events were incomprehensible. He simply could not grasp the political complexities, the demands for reform, or the widespread discontent that gripped his empire. He would be presented with reports of the uprising, but his understanding was too limited to formulate any meaningful response. The pressure mounted on the Regency Council. They needed a decisive leader to navigate the crisis, someone capable of commanding respect and making difficult decisions. Ferdinand, kind-hearted but intellectually absent, was clearly not that person. The decision was made to persuade him to abdicate. His wife Maria Anna and his brother Franz Karl were instrumental in convincing him. Ferdinand, ever compliant, agreed. On December 2, 1848, at the age of 55, he signed the abdication papers, stepping down in favor of his 18-year-old nephew, Franz Joseph. It was a moment of profound significance for the Habsburg dynasty, an unprecedented act, but for Ferdinand himself, it was likely a relief, a release from a burden he could never truly bear. His gentle nature was ill-suited for the tempestuous demands of a revolutionary era. Number 27. A peaceful retirement. After his abdication, Ferdinand I, often called Ferdinand the Good, retreated from public life and spent the remaining years of his long life in peaceful retirement. He moved to Prague Castle, the same imperial residence where Rudolf II had lived in reclusive splendor centuries earlier. But for Ferdinand it became a comfortable and serene haven. He was treated with respect and affection by his family, especially by his successor. Franz Joseph Ferdinand spent his days continuing his simple routines. He gardened, he enjoyed his train rides, and he entertained a small circle of trusted companions. He continued his fondness for sweets and simple pleasures. Despite his intellectual limitations, he was known for his kindness, his devout faith, and his genuine affection for those around him. He lived for another 27 years after abdicating, passing away in 1875 at the age of 82. His life, while marked by profound disability, was arguably one of the most contented among the Habsburg emperors who grappled with mental health issues. He was spared the true burdens of leadership, by others allowing him to live a sheltered life, defined more by gentle routine than by the profound suffering that plagued some of his royal predecessors. His story is a unique footnote in the history of a dynasty, often marked by both brilliance and profound human tragedy. Number 26. The Last Night's Inner Darkness. We now turn to one of the earliest prominent Habsburgs, Maximilian I, Holy Roman Emperor, born in 1459, often known as the Last Knight for his romantic embrace of chivalry and his active, adventurous life. Maximilian was a man of extraordinary ambition, intellect, and physical prowess. He unified vast territories through strategic marriages, famously saying, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." He was a patron of the arts, a military innovator, and a master of propaganda, using printing to spread his image and legacy. However, beneath this vibrant and impressive exterior lay a persistent undercurrent of deep melancholy and a morbid fascination with death. Chroniclers of his time often noted his profound sadness, a dark melancholy that would periodically engulf him. This was not merely a poetic description. It appears to have been a genuine predisposition to depressive states. He was also known for his intense personal anxieties, particularly a profound fear of dying unexpectedly, without confession. This fear drove one of his most peculiar and enduring obsessions, setting him apart from many of his contemporaries. His brilliant mind was capable of grand visions, but it also harbored a profound and chilling preoccupation with his own mortality and the ultimate fate of his soul. Number 25. The Coffin and the Count. Maximilian I's obsession with death was not merely a philosophical contemplation. It was a deeply ingrained personal fear that manifested in bizarre and highly visible ways. He developed an unusual habit of traveling with his own coffin. This was not a symbolic gesture. He literally carried a wooden casket with him on his journeys, a constant, tangible reminder of his impending mortality. This practice was fueled by his fear of sudden death, especially the dread of dying unconfessed. A profound, spiritual anxiety for a devout Catholic monarch. His personal physician, Dr. Hans Gruner, recorded that Maximilian would often spend time alone contemplating the coffin, preparing himself mentally for his end. This macabre travel companion was a stark symbol of his preoccupation. Beyond the coffin, Maximilian also had elaborate plans for his funeral and burial, meticulously detailing how his body should be prepared and interred. He instructed that after his death, his teeth should be pulled out, his hair shaved, and his corpse publicly flogged. This extreme desire for post-mortem humiliation was a form of penance, an attempt to atone for his sins and ensure his salvation. These disturbing rituals and fixations underscore the depth of his internal turmoil, revealing a brilliant mind grappling with profound spiritual anxiety and a dark, persistent melancholy that cast a long shadow over his other eyes. Number 24. A life of perpetual movement. Maximilian I was a king constantly on the move. His reign was defined by relentless travel across his vast domains, moving from castle to castle, campaigning with his armies, and engaging in diplomatic missions. He was an energetic and tireless ruler, always active, always planning, always seeking to expand his influence. This constant activity, however, may have also been a coping mechanism for his underlying melancholic tendencies. By staying perpetually busy, he perhaps sought to outrun the darker aspects of his mind. Despite his constant motion, the shadow of his melancholic nature remained. He often complained of physical ailments that seemed to stem from his mental state. He would be seized by fits of anxiety and despair, periods where he would withdraw even amidst the hustle of court life. His advisors and companions sometimes found him difficult to understand, as his moods could shift dramatically. One moment he would be jovial and engaging, the next plunged into a silent, brooding gloom. This oscillation between intense activity and deep internal sadness paints a picture of a complex and troubled individual. The last night, so outwardly dynamic, was somber, prattling an inner enemy, a somber presence that colored his grand ambitions and his tireless pursuit of glory. Number 23. The burden of finance and failed ambition. Despite his strategic brilliance and impressive dynastic achievements, Maximilian I was constantly plagued by financial difficulty. His ambitious military campaigns, his lavish court, and his extensive patronage of the arts consistently outstripped his revenues. He was perpetually in debt, constantly seeking loans from wealthy bankers and German princes. This financial strain was a constant source of anxiety for the emperor, adding to his already heavy mental burden his grand schemes, such as his lifelong ambition to revive the Holy Roman Empire to its former glory, or his fleeting desire to become pope, often ended in frustration or partial success. These setbacks, combined with the constant struggle for funds, must have fed into his periods of melancholy. He poured his energy into complex, sometimes unrealistic projects, yet the reality of dwindling funds and political resistance often brought him crashing back to earth. His life was a testament to grand visions, meeting harsh realities, a struggle that contributed to his internal suffering. Maximilian, the dazzling last knight, was in many ways a tragic figure, his brilliance often overshadowed by his anxieties and his profound, persistent sadness. His legacy is complex, defined by both his soaring achievements and the quiet torment that seemed to follow him through life. Number 22. The Emperor's Final Thoughts. Maximilian I's final years were characterized by increasing ill health and a deepening of his melancholic tendencies. He continued his restless travels, perhaps knowing his end was near, always with his macabre traveling companion, the coffin. His spiritual anxieties intensified, and he dedicated more time to religious devotion and preparation for death. His instructions for his post-mortem penance were repeated, a testament to his continued obsession with the fate of his soul and his self-perceived unworthiness. He died in Wels, Austria in 1519, at the age of 59. His death in some ways brought an end to his long internal battle. He had meticulously planned his final rites, and his body was subjected to the strange rituals he had demanded. Maximilian I remains a fascinating figure, a Renaissance monarch who exemplified both the era's brilliance and its darker, more superstitious undercurrents. His story is not just one of political ambition and dynastic success, but also a poignant narrative of a powerful ruler wrestling with deep-seated fears, profound sadness, and a singular obsession with death that marked him as one of the Habsburgs profoundly plagued by his own troubled mind. His legacy, therefore, is a complex blend of triumph and personal torment. Number 21. The Invisible Enemy in the Bloodline. The stories of Joanna of Castile, Rudolph II, Philip IV, Charles II, Ferdinand I, and Maximilian I paint a vivid picture of a recurring phenomenon within the Habsburg dynasty. Their struggles, though varied in manifestation and severity, collectively suggest a pattern of mental and emotional vulnerability that seemed to stalk the imperial bloodline. From the obsessive grief of Joanna to the profound intellectual disapparability of Charles II, from the reclusive parentale of Rudolph IV and Maximilian I, and the gentle incompetence of Ferdinand I, each ruler bore a unique burden. These individuals, born into unimaginable privilege and power, were simultaneously trapped by inherent frailties. The sources of their suffering were complex: genetic predisposition, the immense pressures of their positions, personal tragedies, and the limited understanding of mental health in their respective eras. The practice of close intermarriage within the Habsburgs, particularly evident in the Spanish branch, undoubtedly exacerbated these issues, concentrating problematic genes and leading to generations of physical and mental infirmity, while their reigns often shaped the course of European history. Their private lives were often narratives of profound human suffering, a hidden cost of imperial ambition and dynastic purity. The crowns they wore were heavy, not just with political weight, but with the invisible burden of internal torment. Number 20, Echoes of Grief. Joanna of Castile, known as Juana la Loca, set a haunting precedent for the emotional fragility that could afflict Habsburg rulers. Her story, filled with passionate love and agonizing grief, resonates through the centuries. Her refusal to part with Philip's body, her grim procession across Spain, was an extreme manifestation of sorrow, but also a profound break with reality. Contemporary accounts describe her as having moments of lucidity, intermingled with periods of delusion and catatonia. This fluctuation in her state suggests a complex mental illness, perhaps a form of severe depression with psychotic features, or even bipolar disorder, though definitive diagnosis, from a distance of centuries, is impossible. Her eventual confinement, while politically convenient for her father and son, was also arguably a necessary measure, given her inability to govern. Her 4 decades in Tordesillas were a testament to the isolation and neglect often suffered by those deemed mad in her era. Her story is a chilling reminder of how personal tragedy, when combined with a predisposed temperament and the immense pressures of power, could unravel even the most brilliant of minds. Her suffering was genuine, a profound human drama played out on the grand stage of European history, leaving a lasting impression of a queen whose heart broke and whose mind fractured under the unbearable weight of loss and responsibility. Number 19. The Alchemist Emperor's Retreat. Rudolf II's descent into reclusiveness and paranoia serves as another stark example of a Habsburg mind, succumbing to internal pressures. His early reign, characterized by a vibrant patronage of the arts and sciences, sharply contrasted with his later years of profound withdrawal. His fascination with alchemy, astrology, and the occult, while not unusual for his time, became an all-consuming obsession that overshadowed his duties as emperor. It was as if he sought to control a chaotic external world by immersing himself in a meticulously ordered, yet ultimately fantastical internal one. His inability to meet with advisors, his refusal to sign important documents, and his pervasive distrust of those around him paralyzed the Holy Roman Empire at a critical juncture. His mental state directly contributed to the brothers' quarrel, leading to his eventual dethronement. Rudolf's struggles were more than just eccentricities. They were debilitating symptoms of a mind in turmoil, likely grappling with severe depression, anxiety, and paranoid delusions. His story because how mental illness in a ruler can have far-reaching political consequences, weakening the state and creating power vacuums. Prague Castle, once a beacon of imperial power and cultural brilliance, became a melancholic stage for an emperor lost in the labyrinth of his own mind, unable to distinguish between genuine threats and imagined plots. Number 18. Philip the Somber. Philip IV's pervasive melancholy, though perhaps less dramatic than Joanna's or Rudolf's overt symptoms, was nonetheless a significant internal struggle that shaped his reign. His quiet sadness, his withdrawal, and his deep sense of responsibility for Spain's declining fortunes painted him as a somber monarch. He was not prone to wild outbursts or clear delusions, but rather a profound, persistent sadness that seemed to seep into every aspect of his life. This was likely a chronic depressive disorder, intensified by the immense pressures of his office and a series of devastating personal losses. His reliance on the Count Duke of Olivares, while a practical solution to governance, also highlighted his personal struggle with decisiveness and sustained engagement. Philip's retreat into piety and penance in his later years suggests a man seeking spiritual solace for a mind burdened by failure and grief. Velázquez's portraits capture this quiet suffering, showing a king who carried the weight of his empire not just on his shoulders but within his very soul. Philip IV's reign stands as a poignant example of a ruler whose internal emotional landscape directly mirrored the external decline of his powerful nation, a king whose personal sorrow became inextricably linked with the fading glory of his empire. His was a silent, but no less profound form of suffering. Number 17. The tragic legacy of blood. Charles II of Spain remains the most extreme and heartbreaking example of the Habsburgs' genetic vulnerabilities. His birth defects, severe physical deformities, and profound intellectual disabilities were direct consequences of generations of inbreeding. He was a living testament to the dangers of dynastic ambition overriding biological common sense. His inability to walk or talk until late childhood, his constant illnesses, and his intellectual impairment made him unfit to rule from birth. His reign was a continuous charade with the real power wielded by regents and competing court factions. The superstitions surrounding his condition, the belief that he was bewitched, highlights the profound misunderstanding of his true medical state in his era. Charles himself, perhaps influenced by those around him, internalized this belief, adding to his torment. His struggle to produce an heir, a struggle rooted in his physical incapacities, ultimately triggered the War of the Spanish Succession, reshaping the political map of Europe. Charles II's life was a profound human tragedy, a short, painful existence overshadowed by his profound disabilities. He was less a king and more a symbol of the destructive genetic legacy of his family, a final poignant chapter in the Spanish Habsburg line whose end was hastened by his severe and undeniable mental and physical infirmities. Number 16. The Gentle Emperor's Quiet Life. Ferdinand I of Austria offers a different, perhaps gentler perspective on Habsburg mental health struggles. Unlike others who suffered from acquired mental illnesses or emotional distress, Ferdinand was born with a clear congenital condition that resulted in intellectual disability and chronic seizures. He was not mad in the conventional sense, but profoundly limited in his cognitive abilities. His story is one of a kind-hearted, amiable man who simply lacked the mental capacity to fulfill the duties of his high office. His reign as emperor was a well-managed illusion, with a regency council making all the real decisions. Ferdinand's quiet life, devoted to simple pleasures, like gardening and trains, was a deliberate arrangement to shield him from the overwhelming complexities of governing an empire. The tumultuous events of 1848, which he could not comprehend, ultimately led to his abdication. His willing abdication, perhaps a relief for him, allowed for a more capable ruler to take the throne. Ferdinand's long and peaceful retirement in Prague demonstrates that, with proper care and removal from the pressures of power, even a severely impaired individual could find a measure of contentment. His story serves as a reminder that not all mental health challenges manifest as dramatic breakdowns. Some are silent, inherent limitations that nevertheless shape a ruler's destiny. Number 15. The Knight and His Dark Companion. Maximilian I, the Last Knight, presents a fascinating case of a powerful and successful ruler grappling with persistent melancholy and a morbid obsession. His habit of traveling with his own coffin and his elaborate self-punishing funeral plans speak to a profound anxiety about death and the state of his soul. This was not a temporary phase, but a lifelong preoccupation, suggesting a deeply ingrained psychological predisposition, perhaps a form of chronic depression with existential anxiety. His tireless activity, his constant movement across his empire, might be interpreted as a way to outrun his inner demons, a distraction from his pervasive sadness. Yet his melancholic episodes and his sometimes erratic behavior persisted. Maximilian's struggles show that even the most outwardly successful and ambitious individuals can be profoundly afflicted by internal turmoil. His life was a remarkable blend of Renaissance brilliance and medieval superstition, of soaring ambition and gnawing fear. He was a man who conquered lands and forged powerful alliances, yet was ultimately tormented by an invisible enemy, within a constant reminder of the fragility of the human mind, even within the most powerful of emperors. Number 14. The price of dynastic purity. The recurring theme of mental and physical infirmity within the Habsburg lineage cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the practice of endogamy, marriage within a restricted group, typically the same family. The Habsburgs, particularly the Spanish branch, were notorious for their strategy of intermarriage, believing it was the best way to consolidate power, preserve their vast territories, and ensure the purity of their bloodline. Cousins married cousins, uncles married nieces, and these unions were repeated across generations. While this strategy certainly helped them accumulate unprecedented power and wealth, it came at a terrible biological cost. Each successive generation of inbreeding dramatically increased the likelihood of recessive genes, carrying various genetic disorders, becoming expressed. This led to a range of physical deformities, reduced fertility, and crucially an increased predisposition to mental illnesses and cognitive impairments. The cases of Charles II and Ferdinand I are the most direct consequences of this genetic lottery, but even the more emotionally driven struggles of Joanna, Rudolph, and Philip IV might have had a genetic component, intensifying tendencies. The desire for dynastic purity ultimately weakened the very line it sought to strengthen, leaving a trail of suffering monarchs. Number 13. Misunderstanding and mysticism. In the centuries that the Habsburgs ruled, the understanding of mental illness was rudimentary at best. Psychological disorders were often attributed to supernatural causes, demonic possession, witchcraft, or divine punishment. This lack of medical knowledge meant that individuals like Joanna and Charles II, who exhibited clear signs of severe mental illness, were subjected to exorcisms, prayers, and isolation, rather than effective treatment. Their suffering was compounded by a complete inability of their contemporaries to grasp the biological or psychological underpinnings of their conditions. Rudolph II's obsession with alchemy and astrology, while partly intellectual curiosity, also reflects a search for control and understanding in a world he found increasingly chaotic and threatening, perhaps a coping mechanism for his anxiety and paranoia. The melancholic tendencies of Philip IV and Maximilian I were simply accepted as character traits, or a form of spiritual piety, rather than recognized as a potentially debilitating condition. This historical context is crucial. These rulers were not only battling their internal demons, but also facing a world that often misinterpreted their struggles, sometimes cruelly, sometimes out of sheer ignorance. Their lives highlight the tragic consequences of a profound misunderstanding of the human mind, a darkness that was both internal and external. Number 12. The pressure cooker of power. Beyond genetics and the lack of medical understanding, the sheer pressure of ruling vast and complex empires undoubtedly contributed to the mental health struggles of these Habsburg monarchs. From birth, they were raised for a single overwhelming purpose: to govern. The expectations were immense, the responsibilities crushing. Decisions made by a Habsburg emperor or king could literally determine the fate of millions, trigger wars, or reshape continents. This constant, unrelenting pressure to be decisive, to appear strong, and to manage a sprawling bureaucracy would challenge even the most robust mental constitution. For those already predisposed to anxiety, depression, or other viabilities, the crown could become an unbearable burden. Philip IV's deep sense of guilt and responsibility for Spain's decline, or Rudolph II's paralysis in the face of imperial threats, illustrate how the weight of leadership could exacerbate existing conditions. The isolation that often accompanies supreme power further compounded these issues, leaving monarchs with few trusted confidants and little opportunity for genuine relief. The glittering palaces, far from offering solace, often became gilded cages, intensifying the internal struggles of their powerful inhabitants. Number 11. Gender and confinement. The story of Joanna of Castile also highlights the intersection of gender and mental illness in a historical context. While her profound grief and erratic behavior were undeniably real, her diagnosis of madness and her subsequent confinement were also immensely convenient for the men in her life who wished to seize or retain power. Her father, Ferdinand, and later her son, Charles V, both benefited directly from her incapacitation. Declaring a queen mad was a powerful tool to remove her from the political stage without resorting to more drastic or unpopular measures. This is not to say Joanna was entirely sane, but rather that her madness served a political purpose, and her confinement was far more rigid and prolonged than it might have been for a male ruler, exhibiting similar symptoms. Her story raises questions about how women's emotional and mental states were perceived and manipulated in historical contexts, particularly when they held significant power. The patriarchal structures of the time undoubtedly influenced how her condition was interpreted and managed, leading to her being effectively erased from active governance for nearly half a century. Her suffering was genuine, but its political utility made her plight particularly tragic and enduring. Number 10. Art as a witness. The Habsburgs were renowned patrons of the arts, and ironically, some of the very artworks they commissioned serve as subtle yet powerful witnesses to their inner struggles. Velázquez's portraits of Philip IV, for instance, are famed for their ability to capture the king's melancholic and world-weary expression, the somber colors, the king's often distant gaze, and the overall subdued atmosphere of these paintings speak volumes about the monarch's inner state. Velázquez did not idealize. He captured a profound human sadness. Similarly, the detailed inventory of Rudolf II's Kunstkammer, his vast collection of curiosities and scientific instruments, offers a glimpse into his obsessive mind. The sheer volume and eclectic nature of his collection, from astronomical devices to alchemical texts and bizarre automata, reveal a man deeply immersed in a world of his own making, often at the expense of his royal duties. While not a direct portrayal of mental illness, these artistic records Fried in value historietics of the Xiaomi nature. Art, in this sense, becomes a silent chronicler of their mental landscapes. Number 9. The private struggles, public consequences. The mental health issues of these Habsburg rulers were not confined to their private chambers. They had profound and often devastating consequences for their empires and for the broader sweep of European history. Joanna of Castile's incapacitation allowed her father and son to solidify their control over Spain, paving the way for the vast unified Spanish Empire under Charles V. Rudolf II's reclusiveness. Philip IV's melancholia and reliance on a prime minister coincided with Spain's significant decline as a global power. Charles II's severe disabilities directly led to the succession crisis that plunged Europe into a continent-wide war. Even Ferdinand I's gentle incompetence contributed to the revolutionary pressures that eventually forced his abdication. The personal struggles of these monarchs, hidden within the opulence of their palaces, inevitably spilled out onto the grand stage of history, shaping political alliances, military campaigns, and the very destiny of nations. Their internal battles had external ramifications that rippled across centuries, leaving an indelible mark on the historical record. Number 8. A dynasty's enduring mystery. The stories of these 6 Habsburg rulers continue to fascinate historians and psychologists alike. While we can never definitively diagnose individuals from centuries past, the consistent patterns of behavior, the family history of intermarriage, and the documented accounts of their contemporaries provide compelling evidence. The precise nature of their conditions, whether specific mood disorders, psychotic illnesses, or neural developmental disorders, remains a subject of ongoing discussion and scholarly inquiry. What is clear, however, is that these powerful individuals, seemingly untouchable in their royal majesty, were profoundly human in their suffering. They were plagued by forces beyond their control, whether genetic predispositions or the immense psychological pressures of their roles. Their lives offer a poignant reminder that even the highest thrones offer no immunity from the challenges of the human mind. The Habsburg legacy, therefore, is not just one of imperial might and dynastic achievement, but also a haunting chronicle of internal torment, a testament to the invisible enemy that stalked its most powerful members, leaving behind a profound and enduring mystery of a family burdened by its own blood. Number 7. The seeds of suffering in the Spanish line. The Spanish Habsburgs in particular bore the brunt of the dynasty's genetic vulnerabilities. The line began with Joanna of Castile, whose profound mental distress set a tragic precedent. Her son Charles V, though robust, inherited the throne under the cloud of his mother's confinement. His son, Philip II, was known for his reclusiveness and deep piety, sometimes bordering on the obsessive, though not generally classified as mentally ill, in the same severe way as his descendants. Philip III, son of Philip II, married his cousin, Margaret of Austria. Their son, Philip IV, our melancholic monarch, married his niece, Mariana of Austria, and their son Charles II was the catastrophic product of this relentless inbreeding, a living embodiment of the dynasty's biological decline. The Spanish Habsburg line, in its quest for purity and power, systematically amplified the genetic predispositions for mental and physical ailments, leading to a tragic progression of infirmity that culminated in the childless and severely disabled Charles II. This consistent pattern across generations strongly indicates an inherited component to their suffering, making their stories particularly compelling and heartbreaking. The very strategy that built their empire also contained the seeds of its ultimate demise. Number 6. Beyond the crown, human likability. Stripping away the layers of royal pomp and historical grandeur, the stories of these 6 Habsburg rulers reveal a profound human vulnerability. They were individuals, regardless of their titles, who experienced deep sorrow, debilitating anxiety, irrational fears, and cognitive limitations that fundamentally shaped their existence. Their suffering reminds us that mental illness knows no social bounds. It can afflict anyone from the humblest peasant to the mightiest emperor. Their lives also underscore the timeless struggle between personal agency and the constraints of circumstance. Joanna was trapped by her grief and political machinations. Rudolph was lost in his own mind, unable to escape his paranoia. Philip IV carried the weight of empire and personal loss. Charles II was born into an impossible existence. Ferdinand I was limited by congenital disability. Maximilian was driven by a haunting internal fear. Each in their own way battled forces that seemed overwhelming. Their narratives serve as a powerful testament to the enduring presence of mental health challenges throughout history, providing a poignant human dimension to the grand narrative of dynastic power. They were rulers, yes, but also individuals struggling with their own inner demons. Number 5. The impact of an era. It is important to remember the historical context in which these Habsburg rulers lived. The pressures of their eras were immense. Warfare was constant, plague and disease were rampant, and political stability was a perpetual challenge. Religious divisions tore empires apart. In such a turbulent world, the burden on a monarch was extraordinary. While not a direct cause of mental illness, these external stressors could undoubtedly exacerbate existing predispositions or trigger episodes in vulnerable individuals. The limited scientific and medical knowledge of the time meant that treatments for mental conditions were often non-existent, ineffective, or even harmful. There was no understanding of neurochemistry, no therapy beyond prayer or primitive remedies. This meant that the suffering of these monarchs was often prolonged, untreated, and misunderstood. Their conditions were viewed through lenses of sin, magic, or moral failing, rather than as medical ailments. This societal and scientific context deepened their isolation and limited any possibility of genuine recovery or management of their conditions. Their struggles were therefore compounded by the very era in which they lived, a time ill-equipped to comprehend or alleviate their profound internal pain. Number 4. The spectacle of suffering. For these Habsburg rulers, their mental health struggles often became public spectacles, observed and commented upon by courtiers, diplomats, and chroniclers. Joanna's morbid journey with Philip's coffin was a public display of her profound breakdown. Charles II's physical deformities and intellectual impairments were visible for all to see. Rudolph II's reclusiveness, while self-imposed, was widely known and criticized. This public scrutiny added another layer of pressure and perhaps contributed to their isolation. How does one maintain an image of infallible power when one's mind is visibly failing? The court, often a hotbed of intrigue, would have capitalized on these vulnerabilities, using them for political gain. The suffering of these monarchs, therefore, was not always a private affair. It was often a dramatic, unsettling, and sometimes manipulated performance on the grand stage of European royalty. The very public nature of their suffering cemented their place in history as examples of the human cost of power and the tragic consequences of a mind in torment. Their lives, played out in the full glare of court and public opinion, served as stark warnings. Number 3. A legacy of fascination. Centuries after their reigns, the stories of these Habsburg rulers continue to captivate and intrigue. Their tales of power, privilege, and profound mental anguish resonate with audiences today, sparking curiosity about the intersection of history, psychology, and genetics. They are not merely historical footnotes. They are compelling human dramas that offer insights into the complexities of the human condition. The sheer scale of their power, juxtaposed with the depth of their private suffering, creates a powerful narrative tension that continues to draw attention. The fascination with their lives stems from the universal themes they embody: love and loss, power and vulnerability, sanity and madness. Their stories provoke questions about the nature of leadership, the impact of family legacy, and the enduring mystery of the human mind. Their tragic narratives stand as stark reminders that even the most formidable dynasties could not escape the shadow of internal vulnerability. The Habsburg struggles with mental illness remain a compelling and poignant chapter in the grand tapestry of European history, inviting continuous exploration and reflection. Number 2. The royal cost of power. The stories of these 6 Habsburg rulers, Maximilian I, Joanna of Castile, Rudolph II, Philip IV, Charles II, and Ferdinand I, serve as a stark reminder of the immense royal cost of power. While they held sway over vast empires and commanded immense wealth, their lives were often marked by profound personal suffering, stemming from their mental and physical health challenges. The weight of their crowns was compounded by the burdens of their minds. Their experiences highlight a crucial, often overlooked aspect of dynastic history: that behind the titles and the grandeur lay human beings grappling with the same vulnerabilities as anyone else, but amplified by their unique positions. The pursuit of power and dynastic purity came with a steep, often tragic price, paid in a currency of human anguish and fractured minds. Their lives offer a poignant counter-narrative to the triumphs of empire, a testament to the internal battles waged by those on the highest thrones. Number 1. The enduring shadow of the crown. The Habsburg dynasty, one of the most enduring and powerful in European history, left behind a legacy that is both glorious and haunting. Its triumphs of territorial expansion and cultural patronage are undeniable. Yet the stories of these 6 rulers reveal an enduring shadow that fell across their golden age. The shadow of mental illness, from the visionary emperor consumed by a fear of death, to the queen lost in grief, to the monarch crippled by paranoia, to the king burdened by melancholy, and finally to the last Spanish Habsburg. Their struggles were real, their suffering profound, leaving an indelible mark on their personal lives, and at times altering the course of history itself. The crown for these Habsburgs was not merely a symbol of power, It was a heavy burden, a constant reminder of the invisible enemy that haunted their bloodline, a chilling testament to the human cost of absolute power